everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Music, Money, and Life podcast. Today I have a songwriter originally from LA. He's now currently residing in Denver, Colorado. I have Jason Moore with me. Jason, how are you?
Hey, doing great. How are you, Aaron?
I'm doing great, Jason. So we were talking before we started recording, and you were sort of bringing me up to speed on your background. And you were saying you've been writing songs or you've been pursuing licensing rather for about five years now. Can you tell us, just so my listeners kind of know a little bit about you, what are some of the placements you've had over the last 5 years?
Well, I've had my music in a variety of different avenues for licensing. I've had my music on television, and even the television world is pretty diverse. I mean, there's a huge difference between, let's say, broadcast network show and maybe a cable reality show. So I've had kind of both ends of the spectrum. Just a couple of months ago, I had a vocal track featured in the show The Originals, which is on the CW, and then I've had a ton of like instrumental tracks, like on LA Inc. and Talking Dead and shows like that where it's just sort of tucked in the background. And so even within television, for example, there's such a huge range in how the music can be used and what kind of fees you could expect for different tracks, vocal versus instrumental, the length that the track's being used for, the context in which the track is being used. So that's a little bit about some things that I've seen just from my own experience with television placements. And then I've had quite a bit of work in advertising, a lot of like small budget web ads for huge companies, though, like Red Bull will put out like a web series of ads. Mm-hmm. And so, it's a really good credit to have. But, in terms of the money, it's kind of comparable to maybe background track in a reality show or something along those lines. And then I've also had some tracks from like what I would call new media. So basically tracks that, music for productions that you might not really see these kinds of productions anywhere else besides the internet. So you might have like Time Magazine, for example, doing a multimedia piece on a story. And so they'll need music for that. And so they'll use music that they license from various publishers and libraries from that as well. And then I've had a little bit of film work. I'm a huge fan of indie films, so I'd really like to, up my credits in the film area. But I've had a few things from like student films to short films to an indie feature. And that was a while back called Cabin Fever. And so, I've seen a lot of applications for music, and I've seen kind of some trends in terms of what licensing companies can do for various different uses of music. And I've also talked with a lot of the most successful music supervisors just to kind of get some market research done. So I'm hoping I could share some of that information with everybody today as well, because I think they'll find that really valuable. Because ultimately, the music supervisor on for most applications of licensing music, that music supervisor is the client. That's who we're trying to get business from. That's who's ultimately going to pay us. I have a lot of information just kind of compiled from what these people are saying and what they want from people like us.
Awesome. So it sounds like you have a really diverse range of placements. Who are you getting most of your placements through? Are they through publishers? Are you going through libraries?
They are, yeah. Absolutely. And just as a disclaimer, I'm gonna kind of keep a lot of this stuff anonymous, just in terms of like who music supervisors I talk to, because they've asked me to do that, and the libraries and publishers that I've worked with as well. But I'll tell you, I have I have about 250 tracks, 250 pieces of music right now that are in libraries and publishing companies and licensing agencies. And I would say 70% of that music, actually probably a little bit more, maybe 75% of that music is instrumental, and then the remaining is vocal. And I'm signed with maybe 15 different companies,
Okay.
but honestly, the majority of my placements, I would say 80 to even 90% of my placements come from about 3 of those companies.
Okay.
So, and I've heard other people who are doing this kind of talk about their ratios, and they're pretty similar.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of goes back to like an 80-20 rule in business.
Yep.
That, it's kind of known that you get like, about 80% of your business through about 20% of your contacts or clientele or whatnot. I've kind of seen that play out for myself as well.
Sure.
But the companies I work with, it's kind of cool. At first, I wasn't really sure how this would play out, but one, very well-known, non-exclusive company that was, a couple of years ago bought out by this huge, massive media conglomerate.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about. But
yeah, you probably know who I'm talking about. And they've been very consistent in getting placements for me. And I hear a lot of gossip out there in the business, and people are just speaking from their own experience and whatnot. But I would say that I've worked with some companies that at the time, maybe a couple years ago, people were like, "Yeah, I don't know if that's a very respected company or whatnot." I even heard music supervisors kind of diss this company. Well, lo and behold, not too long after that. That agency is a sponsor of the Guild of Music Supervisors. So they're one of the music supervisor guilds, like go-to suppliers of music. So I think just a little story like that goes to show what most people who've been doing this for a little while realize is that there's this theme of following this map that's laid out and this set of rules and yeah, of course there's etiquette, but the idea of like following this step-by-step process to getting your music license versus what I've heard a lot of music supervisors kind of refer to as like more of like the Wild West sort of setting, this landscape of music licensing where for every rule, there's at least one exception, and you can never really quite put your finger on this moving target to getting your your music license, because there's no real set rules. Obviously, you want to have you want to follow a certain etiquette, but there's so much spontaneity. Anything can really happen at any time, and it makes it very difficult to navigate because in most other fields there's a pretty straightforward path and it's a step-by-step process. Well, with music licensing, like I said, I've been at this for a few years now, and I'm gaining solid momentum. I'm getting my music placed regularly, like on a monthly basis, but somebody else might pop in and they might get their first placement within a month. And somebody else might not get a placement for years, so you just never.
I think what you're touching on is totally rings true, and it makes teaching music licensing very difficult, right? Because there really isn't like this one clear path. And I do a lot of consulting with songwriters looking to license their music, and I think everyone's sort of looking for this formula that I don't think really exists, other than cast a fairly wide net. Like you said, you're in like 15 different places, but really 2 or 3 sounds like they're really coming through for you. And I think that's really true across the board. But the difficult thing is knowing who those 2 or 3 companies are. And that might be different for everybody, right?
Exactly.
Because everybody's circumstances.
But it should be.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of the trick.
Yeah, that is a really good point you're bringing up, because we all create different kinds of music. And, some of us probably create a pretty diverse set of music, and others maybe focus more on a genre. I happen to focus more on guitar rock music. So, you're going to find, if you're doing your homework, you're going to find the companies or the publishers or even the music supervisors with the certain shows who really specialize and need that kind of music. Wow. And that is such a better use of time than just sending out, 50 packages to the first, 50 companies you see on a directory. Yeah. So, it's another theme that I've been thinking about, just kind of getting ready for our conversation today, is the idea of working smarter versus working harder. And, the better you know your own music, the better you know the various opportunities, if that's a library you want to work with, or a publisher, or an actual music supervisor who's got a show that uses the kind of music that you make. That's called working smarter, instead of just, blindly sending out a bunch of stuff and hoping somebody bites. But, we do all have to start somewhere. But one thing that's come up over and over again, just in a variety of capacities, and this is just straight out of music supervisors' mouths, is that the one thing that they want people like us who are creating music to do to make their jobs easier is know your pitch, know what the context is, how the music supervisor needs to use music in a given show. If I'm going to pitch to Sons of Anarchy, I better have the kind of music that fits the tone of that show. It's a very dark, aggressive show. They use a lot of loud guitar music in that show, and I better have an idea if I'm going to actually contact that music supervisor directly for that show, I better have an idea of what's happening right now in that season of that show to the main characters, and how does the song that I'm pitching, relate to the plot line of the show within the season, and be able to set it up for the music supervisors where I say something like, hey, I got this song, I think it fits this character's journey right now in the season, and I think it could kind of fit with sort of the conflict that he's going through, in the last couple of episodes, and give some information to really set up like a real custom pitch instead of just a blind, hey, check out my tracks. I think they might work for your show. And then the guy listens to your stuff and it's like disco. It has nothing to do with the show. And then he thinks you're basically a jackass, right? So basically over and over again, music supervisors came back when I asked them this question: what's the most important thing you want a music supplier, if that's an artist or a publisher or a library, what's the most important thing you want us to do to make your job easier? Time and time again, the vast majority of them said, know your pitch, know what you're trying to get your music placed into, and target specifically the right music for that right application. Because everybody's short on time. They don't have time to look at stuff like, maybe they'll use a disco song at some point for some random scene, but if it's not the kind of music that show's being used, that's using consistently, you are kind of wasting that supervisor's time, and you kind of ruin your credibility in the process.
Sure.
And that's the worst thing to do. And I would say the same thing applies to libraries and publishers, because a lot of them are, huge, diverse, catalogs of music, but there's also quite a few boutique ones that have a very specific niche, that work with a very specific number of music supervisors on a certain number of shows. And the reason those music supervisors come back to those publishers is because they always supply the right kinds of music. And so they're genre focused suppliers of music. And so I think it's just good. It's worth that extra time to do a little homework and work a little bit smarter, and you'll end up saving your resources as a result. You won't send out as many packages, and in the end, you'll save a lot more time too.
Sure. No, that makes total sense. And I think by doing your due diligence, you're not only doing yourself a service, you're doing the whole music community a service, right? Because if you think about it, at the end of the day, we all have a finite amount of time. And I often wonder what percentage of submissions to supervisors and publishers and libraries are just completely not appropriate and end up taking up an inordinate amount of time. I mean, I'm sure it's at least half, if not more. So I think you touch on a really good point.
Yeah. There's definitely been a lot of feedback about blind submissions out there, and that's one of the reasons. Like, I won't submit to a music supervisor unless I know I have not just the right track for that show. And film's even harder to. I mean, don't even get me started talking about film, but like shows, at least you have a consistent kind of feel that's happening across the show. So there's a little bit of hope there that you might hit the nail on the head for that show and that placement. Yeah. But for film, it's a totally different animal, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But I won't submit to a supervisor for a show unless I know the song I have fits the tone of that show, not only like globally, but what's happening right now in the season. And if it can fit that what's going on in a character, then even better. But if not, then I just hold back, and I just assume, look, if presenting my music will be able to actively pitch that what I found is it's so time consuming to try to, play matchmaker for a song that, after I started trying to do that for a while, I found myself, with like months going by and I hadn't even been in the studio to create a track. And I got into this to make music, not to be a music pitcher. So, I kind of came to the realization that for me, working smarter means just creating the best music I can and as much of it as possible. And so that's why, like I was telling you earlier before we started recording, for me, time is a very precious commodity. I'm sure it is for most of your listeners out there. But, I have 2 small children at home and I work a day job right now. I'm making placements, every month, but it's nowhere close to being able to provide a full-time income for me. So I work a day job as well. And, I'm lucky if I get 2 hours each day to get in the studio or to pitch music or whatnot, maybe 3 hours on a really good day. And so, it's about trying to create as much music as I can within that limited time. And yeah, like an hour, 2 hours a day really does add up if you're doing it every day. I mean, I've been able to create whole projects just from, 1 or 2 hours a day of just consistent, dedicated, focused work. And I actually kind of feel like it's made me be a better artist because, I'm trying to work as smart as possible and just keep my focus razor sharp, and so if I only have an hour after the kids go to sleep, to get in the studio, I know exactly what I have to crank out. If I'm laying down bass or whatnot, I'm focused and it makes me be very efficient. So, I guess I'm bringing this up because I've heard some of your other posts and about time management and things like that. And I just feel like, at this point in my life, if I can do this and I can crank out a song in about a week with, 1 to 3 hours a day of studio time, then like anybody can do this. If there's people out there listening who don't have small children, at home, I mean, they take up a whole, and here's a guy, you're listening to a guy right now who's got 2 of them, and I'm making music pretty consistently.
Still finding time to do it.
Yeah, so I feel like if I can do it, anybody can do it. And it's hard sometimes to get going. It's hard to get, the umph to get in, and especially if you've kind of got out of the rhythm for a little while. I get that. I've been there. I was just recently there, and I had to just say, all right, enough's enough. I've been kind of taking a break for a couple weeks, from the holidays, and now I need to get back in there and just crank it, and here I am a couple weeks later, and I'm working on my second song of 2014 after about a week and a half, and I'm feeling good about it. And sometimes, there's this theme of, like we were talking about earlier, excellence versus perfection. And sometimes it's really easy to be tempted to kind of go for the perfect song, and you got 1,000 plugins and, 500 overdub tracks that you can use in Pro Tools or whatever. And, and you got amazing surgical editing abilities to zoom in and, vocal line your track or, pitch shift your track to perfection. Well, I think, some of this is about, the soul of the music that you're creating and your artistic expression as a creative person making music. And I just think it's so easy now, more than ever, with all the technology we have, to kind of get lost in that quest for perfection, and as a result, we kind of lose the excellence of our music and our art. And so, for me, that whole theme of excellence versus perfection has been a big one too. I kind of just limit myself to look. The take's only going to get as good as it can get. I don't auto-tune my stuff, for example. Like, I just figure, look, there's enough of that out there where people are, artificially kind of enhancing their music. Like, I want to try to do my music like real and have it be pure. And I think you can kind of tell a difference. And the kind of, placements that I'm going after, like, they want that kind of real sound anyway, And as an artist, I'll feel more proud of that if I say, well, that was the best take I could do. I didn't have to comp a whole bunch of different tracks together to make that or whatnot. And to me, that's excellence. And it might not be, perfect, but what is perfect? Is perfect ever really achievable? So I think kind of knowing your limits as an artist and going for more the excellence route is really, really a good thing. That's my opinion. I mean, yeah, you have to compete compete with people like I think we mentioned earlier. We're, anybody who's out there as an indie artist or a band or whatnot trying to license their music, we have, in a lot of ways, we have the odds stacked against us. We're competing with bands that have a name, bands who are cross marketing with the media in terms of like putting out their release, and then they feature that song in a show, and they have a name behind them. They have a huge budget in some cases. Like I just heard, like for example, Arcade Fire's last record, Reflector, it was like a budget of 1.5 mil that they used to produce that record. Here we are, we're on a shoestring, right? We got a Pro Tools rig and maybe some outboard gear and some instruments and a lot less time. And so yeah, we're competing with a crazy amount of resources and a crazy amount of talent out there. And so I think that's really humbling, and I think that's important to remember sometimes for a lot of reasons. You want to go for excellence, in my opinion, and not worry about perfection, because it's never going to be perfect. And then another thing that's really important, I would say, is just like kind of a reality check. Like, look, there's so many great musicians out there. There's so much talent out there. There's going to be music that is, competing directly with my music. That's going to be better than my music. It's just a fact of life. And, once I started to accept that, it freed me up to not worry so much about, okay, yeah, why is my stuff not getting placed? Like, it's so good or whatever. Well, it might not be as good as some of the stuff I'm competing with. And you know what? Like, yeah, I've created some music I'm really proud of, but hey, there's a lot of people just like me and probably better than me and probably have more resources than I do, and I'm competing against them. So, I'm going to be really grateful for every single placement that I ever get. And when you put your post out around Thanksgiving last year, that really resonated with me because, I realized, man, I've had placements that I've been paid pennies for. I mean, literally fractions of pennies in some cases. Like if you're at a restaurant or something, you hear some music in the background. Well, there are certain libraries that do that you can get your song placed and it gets in rotation and it's played in retail. Well, that's really cool. That's really cool to think my music's out there, like around the world in all kinds of countries, played in a variety of different settings, from coffee shops to restaurants to retail stores and whatnot. But when it comes to money, that stuff's like fractions of pennies. But I am so thankful for even a placement like that. I got paid 0.0003 of a cent. But hey, it's being used, it's being played, someone's it somewhere, and that's so awesome. And some people never even get one of those. They never even get their music heard anywhere.
Well, that's just it. I think it's really important when you're pursuing something like a music career in general. I mean, just the fact that we're able to pursue something like music, I think we should be grateful for that. I don't know about you, but I've done quite a bit of traveling over the last few years, and I've traveled to some really poor countries. And I think if I remember correctly, the statistic that I came across when I did that blog post you mentioned is that something like 80% of the world lives on less than $10 a day. So I think it's important to keep things in perspective, and
absolutely.
And just realistically, we're not all going to be rock stars, and I'm okay with that. I don't think everybody who pursues music is meant to be a household name. But I will say this, and this is something I've kind of been thinking about a lot. I focus on licensing, obviously, and when it comes to licensing, there's a finite number of spots, and we're competing with more musicians than there are potential placements, right? It's just that simple. But when it comes to getting our music out into the world, I don't know how many musicians there are in the world. I've never seen that statistic, but there's like 7 billion people in the world. So I think licensing is one revenue stream, and it's a great one, but there's certainly enough people to go around, I think, in terms of just consuming music. So I'm
sure.
kind of focusing on that this year as well.
Yeah, you brought up so much in that comment. I mean, the first thing I was thinking of is just to be able to be an artist and create is such a luxury, and in music specifically, because music, especially if you're recording music, there's a lot of equipment involved, and it's not cheap. and it's a luxury. And I think it's important to remember, like, not only how great it is just to be able to have the ability to create something artistically, but also to be able to, record it and have it available for people to listen to. Like that is something to be grateful for. And that's not even having a placement. But every placement that I've received, I am so thankful for, and I celebrate them all. From the ones that pay, 4 figures to the ones, like I said, that don't even pay a penny. And to me, that has created a shift in my whole outlook on this whole thing. And I think it's actually, I don't know if this sounds too new agey for people, but I think it's actually affected the kinds of placements and the number of placements that I've been receiving. Because I think when you're open to being grateful for things, then I think the world is open to you, and you actually achieve more success. And I've heard a lot of very successful people mention a similar kind of trend and pattern. And I think there's something to that. So I think it's really important to, for us all out there, gosh, man, there's so many of us, and we're all going through a similar experience trying to get our songs placed. And it's really important to just be thankful for the successes that you do have. Maybe you haven't got a placement yet, or maybe you're not where you want to be with your goals. You're getting some placements, but not as many as you want, or the kinds of placements you want.
Yeah.
But hey, every one of us has something to be thankful for and something to celebrate. And then when you do celebrate those successes, because sometimes they don't come that often, that can really help your mindset and help, encourage you to keep going. Because it does get discouraging sometimes, and it does get hard to keep going. And sometimes you feel like, man, nobody cares. Nobody really, even wants to listen to this, or, I'm not getting the kind of feedback or whatever it is. And we all know we had moments like that. So
sure.
It's like, man, just celebrate the sweet successes when you get them, because it's so important to do. And I think it leads to more success.
Yeah, I agree 100%. This is something that I've written a lot about over the last few years. It's just, it does sort of sound new agey, but whenever you focus, like whatever you focus on, I think you really bring more of that into your life. So if you're in this sort of negative spiral of feeling down on yourself, or feeling sorry for the fact that you haven't gone as far as you want to, I think it's just the wrong frame of mind to be in, right? So I think if you, let's face it, if you write music and you write great music, you want to share it with people, with the world. I think that's normal. So I think in terms of licensing, once you get your music into the right hands, there's only so much you can do. So I think you kind of have to focus on writing music and let other people pitch it and place it for you. Can you talk a little bit about how you've sort of maintained that balance? I know you said you still work a full-time job. How many hours are you writing as opposed to pitching your music to publishers and libraries and supervisors?
Yeah, it's changed. I've changed course quite a bit in the last few years, and I would say that's kind of slowed me down, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Like, I would recommend, for your listeners, like, pick a strategy and stick with it and see it through for a few years, 2-3 years before you really evaluate that strategy. I've changed my strategy so many times. I think it's slowed me down. As I've learned new things, I've said to myself, well, let me start my own publishing company, try to pitch my own stuff. And I realized, whoa, a year into that, like, gosh, how grueling that is, and how far that took me away from making my own music. And so, I've switched gears again and went back to just, I'm gonna focus on creating the best music I can, and let somebody else, like you said, let somebody else pitch it. So, there's nothing wrong with doing your own stuff, in my opinion, but you got to know what you're in for, and you got to realize how much time that's going to take, and research and resources. And if you're okay with, sacrificing that time from the creative process as an artist, I would say go for it.
Yeah.
But and there's so many advantages and disadvantages to all the different approaches. So, you can really get kind of lost in the muck.
So what do you find works the best at this point? You said you've kind of changed paths a few times. Are you focusing?
I personally feel like my greatest strength is in creating music. So I'm going to create the best music I can possibly create. I'm going to create as much of it as I can, because ultimately, I got into this to make music. And that's something I've been thinking about more and more. It sounds so simple and basic, but it's actually quite profound. I didn't get into this to see my music on a commercial or in a show, you know. In fact, when I do see that happen, it's great, and when I do get paid for it, it's great. But it's not as great as what I feel inside myself when I produced a track that I'm really proud of, that I'm really happy with. Like a little example, you know, the happiness that I feel when I see a track, like I had something on the show 24 a couple years ago, like one of the last episodes of that show, and it was a big moment for me to see it, you know, in real time, and I was stoked. Don't get me wrong, I was really stoked. But you know what I'm more stoked on? I'm more stoked when I'm listening to a rough mix in the car, and my little 4-year-old like knows the words of the song and he's singing along. And that you know, that makes me feel so happy. And you know, I have that bond with my kid. He knows my music. You know, he knows the words. He like rocks out to the beats and stuff. It's so cool. And when I produce something that I feel like, man, this is one of the best songs I've ever done. Like the fulfillment that comes from that, you know, it can't really be compared to anything else. Yeah. And to me, like, I spent a lot of time over the holidays kind of reflecting on that, because to me, you know, I think I decided in that moment over the holidays, like, look, I'm gonna try to remain an artist throughout this thing, and licensing is one way to get my music out there and heard, and maybe get a little recognition, and yeah, you know, make a little bit of money on the side. You know, for me right now, it's like I'm making enough every year to, like, I'm a school teacher, so this is like a summer jobs worth, like, you know, like I'm getting placements every month, but when you add it all up, you know, what I take home from it after taxes and all, it's like a summer income, you know, and that's cool, but like, it's not why I create music. You know, it's an outlet, it's an application for how my music can be used. And I think that it goes back to the art versus commerce. And what I realize is that I'm so much happier when I just focus on being an artist. And if it gets used, and if it gets placed, and if people like it, cool. But if not, you know what, as long as I like it, I'm just so much happier. And just to be able to make music on a regular basis, like, it makes me feel good, and it makes me happier. And I think when I'm feeling good, I think that will come through in music, and I think it will get placed more. And that's what I've been seeing the last couple of years, as I've kind of started to get more toward this strategy of, you know, like I said earlier, I'm just going to create as much great music, the best music I can make in all the various aspects, because it's hard. You got your production, you got the song, you got the musicianship, and then you have like the arrangement. I mean, there's a lot, the performance of it. There's so many aspects to getting a song recorded well. There's a lot to master. And, you know, that in itself, you know, I do everything myself, like most of your listeners. I mean, that's enough to focus on, my opinion. Yeah. You know, no,
I think yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think you've touched on something really important, which is, you know, this idea of sort of assessing, why do we make music in the first place, right? And it, you know, number one, if you're making music because you're hoping to get rich, I mean, I can think of 100, you know, ways to make money easier than trying to break into the music business.
It's so true.
You know, it's probably like the stupidest get rich quick scheme that I know of. So I think it's really important. I think I've come to a pretty similar conclusion, Jason, in that even with clients that I coach, I let people know that I basically approach licensing as an afterthought. You know, in other words, first and foremost, I want to create music that I'm really proud of, that I like personally. Then if I can monetize it, great. But I'm not trying to think about ways to monetize it while I'm writing it. Do you relate to that?
Yeah, I could definitely echo that. I mean, but I'll also level with you. Like, I've caught myself, you know, in the middle of a studio session, or writing, even worse, sure. When I'm writing lyrics, like, oh, you know, gosh, would this lyric ever get licensed, or is this song hooky enough or whatnot? And I've literally had to kind of untrain my brain that regard. Because, what I've seen earlier, we were talking about, this idea of the music business being the Wild West. There's no hard set rules to any of it. And, a lot of people, when they try to formulate a hit song, they have a rule book for that. And yeah, on some levels that makes sense. You don't want to bore your listener before they get to the chorus, or there's got to be some kind of hook or whatnot. But I am very leery of too much of that kind of thinking, because that's not what making art is about. You're not thinking about a formula when you're making a true piece of art. And when something is art and something has a life and a spirit in and of itself, i.e. a song, people will feel that, and ultimately I believe if it's quality, it's going to get placed. And you know what? The truth of the matter is, actually, that even pretty good, like decent music that's really well produced will get placed a lot.
Yeah.
So, I think it all comes down to production. Like if you can put together some chords and have a decent sense of a groove, and it's really well produced, it's going to get placed, and it's going to get placed a lot. That's kind of a nice thing too. But in terms of art, yeah, I think just to be aware of certain things, like if you're doing a vocal track, some words, when sung or sang or whatnot, they may not be placeable. They may sound like a curse word. Like I had one agent say, "Hey, I really want to pitch this track, but in the second verse, it sounds like you're saying shit."
Yeah.
And I was like, "That's not at all what I'm saying. It's not the lyric at all." He's like, "Doesn't matter. It's just what
That's
it
what it
sounds
like." Yeah. And
So,
listen, I'm not saying that you should completely not think about commercial applications for your music while you're writing music, but I'm just saying personally, I don't specifically try to write music that I hope will get placed in specific projects that much anymore. And I used to be invited. I had a publisher that would pitch me ideas. She would say, "I need a song for this show. Can you come up with a goth rock song?" Or "I need a song for this show. Can you come up with an electronica song?" And I would end up spending weeks and weeks, in some cases, writing and recording these songs that a lot of times wouldn't end up being used. So I guess the conclusion I came to is I would rather spend my time on music that I'm going to be really proud of first and foremost, and then approach licensing and approach CD sales and all these things. But
yeah,
first and foremost, I want to create something that I like personally.
I would still echo that in my own experience for sure. I would add to it though that, and I'm sure you feel this way, if you've been doing this for a little while and you get a sense for which tracks have been placed, or if you just watch the kind of stuff, you want your stuff in a movie, you gotta watch a lot of movies that are like the kind of movie you'd like to see your song in, and you get to see, after a while you get to kind of be familiar with, how's the music being used? And after a while kind of doing that and getting some stuff placed, you kind of start to get a sense of, okay, what works and what doesn't. And so, not that I'm using that to kind of be more commercial or whatnot, but it's almost like a common sense. I know that it would probably, the arrangement would probably work better this way, and it would probably, and I find that it probably would lend itself to a better song anyway, and more placeable. And so it's just very small, very detailed, decisions that I found myself making just based on my own experiences with getting stuff placed, if that makes sense. Hopefully your listeners will kind of get what I'm saying. And then in terms of you're saying, if a publisher asks you to write a certain type of song, I've had a couple of experiences like that, and I actually had one of my favorite songs that I've done was like that. The guy called me up. He's like, "Look, this was last March. He's like, "Look, we need a track. It sounds like this band. And can you do it? Can you kind of have a similar sound? Can you do it?" And I was like, "Whoa, I've never actually tried to write a sound alike before."
Yeah.
I don't know. This is kind of a little bit against my integrity. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm just going to try to have some fun with it. And I wrote a track, and I don't think it's a ripoff of the song. There's a quote I love. It's saying there's a difference between, a thief and a robber. A robber just takes the stuff, but a thief uses art to try to steal it.
Sure.
And
and listen, we all
arts too.
Yep.
There's no original ideas out there.
Exactly.
All arts are influenced by other. you know, and that's how it's been since the dawn of time. So yeah, you know, you do steal from your influences a little bit, and if you do it really well, then by God, I think your influences would be stoked to see that they were your influences, you know, because they've had influences.
Yeah.
You know, like,
and I think a lot of this, Jason, really boils down to what your personal goals are. You know, like you said, you still work a full-time job. I don't know what your long-term plans are. I don't know if you're hoping to transition into doing music full-time, but if you want to make money from music full-time, then maybe you do have to think about some of these things a little bit differently. But for me, I want to do music that I'm proud of, and if I can perform it and make money from that and do licensing, make a little from that, you know, that works for me at this point.
Yeah, I think a full-time income in music these days it's rare that you'll see that in one avenue. I mean, even famous bands, they don't get all their money from just touring or just licensing or just record sales, if there's such a thing anymore, right? Or merchandise. It's a combination of all the things. And like you're saying, you know, you still perform and you get your stuff placed, and you know, and you coach. And I think that's working smarter. The people who I have talked to, or the people who I know, who make there's very few of them who make their entire full-time living off of licensing. The reality of what they do, unless they got in about 10 years ago, before, like at the peak of the market, you know, which is something I'd like to talk about a little bit in a minute. But you know, the people I've talked to who do this full time, they have like 900 tracks. First of all,
yeah, they're cranking out,
which to me is insane.
Yeah,
and it's mostly cues. It's mostly like, you know, so there's cues and there's songs. For your listeners out there who might not be familiar with the jargon, so it's like a 30 to 90-second instrumental piece used for like what is called wallpaper music. That's in the background of like a reality show, and it's going to get you, you know, no money up front in a sync fee. It's going to get you a royalty from ASCAP, or BMI, or wherever you're affiliated with. But the problem with those types of shows is that they're on these cable stations like True TV or the Food Network, the Food Channel, right, or Discovery. And the way that those stations have their deals set up is that they're not considered broadcast. So you get a very small fraction per airing of that show that your song's in than you would if you were on like the CW or NBC or a network station. And they just line their shows up. If you've ever watched these reality shows, they've just lined them up with music, back-to-back music, because it's dirt cheap. And in a lot of ways, they're taking advantage of artists. But, you know, it's a great way to get credits. But anyway, these guys, you know, they got 900, 1,500 songs, and they're getting hundreds of these a month. They're getting hundreds of these kinds of placements a month. And I mean, I don't know about you, but the idea of how the hell would I create 900 songs? I mean, that just seems almost impossible.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling.
But that's one approach, right? And that's more of like production music, background music.
It's production music.
And
exactly.
Hats off to those guys. I have a few friends that do that. Yeah, that's not what I'm about at all. You know, I wrote maybe 7 songs last year, and maybe 3 of those I think are like really, really good songs. So I think a lot of it comes down to how much music you have in you and what your goals are. If you want to crank out, you know, sort of generic production music and make, I don't know, 15 or 20 or 30, you know, whatever you can make from that, that's awesome. I have nothing against that. But again, like, are you trying to be a songwriter who writes really great art, or are you trying to crank out, you know, rock riffs that generate a couple $100 a pop? That's a personal question, I guess.
Well, and even a couple $100 for a placement, like, we're kind of coming out of a really bad spot. I mean, obviously everybody is with the economy and in all factors, but music licensing especially, you know, when I talk to these music supervisors, and we were in the thick of it, and budgets were at the lowest they've ever seen. You know, the good news is, like, the budgets are starting to pick up. I foresee 2014 is going to be a really great year. I mean, what's great to hear, you know, I think for your listeners, is now's a very good time to be making music and trying to license it, because the economy's on the upswing. There's going to be more placement opportunities. The sync fees are going to increase. They've been at record lows. They're never going to come back to where they were in the early 2000s, late 90s, or early to about 2004 or so. That was probably the peak, I think, of the industry. But you know what? Compared to where it's been in the last 5 years, like we're heading. There's definitely the light at the end of the tunnel. We're almost to that light, and things are going to get a lot better. So it's a great time. But the flip side too is that there's just more music out there. There's more competition. It's getting easier to produce tracks that sound really good. And so, we all got to be up on our game even more to be able to compete and get our music placed. But yeah, just a few, I'm going to have to run here in a few minutes because I got some kids coming in here that I'm going to have to work with. But just some few stats, your listeners might find valuable. The music supervisors I talk to, there's about 30 of them. And, out of that 30, that at the time we had, we had the Emmy award-winning show. We had the Oscar winner for Best Picture, music supervisor on those projects. We've had people who been indie supervisors for a few years, and now they're after just a couple years of the hot indie supervisor on the scene. We've also had like veterans who've been working since the 70s, and virtually all of them are very successful, still working today. We work all the time every time we turn on a screen. So these are the people I was talking to. When I asked them, how many different suppliers of music, that could be an artist or a publisher or a library, how many do you work with? 70% of them said they work with just a few dozen tops. 30% said they actually work with hundreds. So what that tells me is that most supervisors are going to want to work with a company versus an artist reaching out. Not that you can't reach out, but you got to realize it's going to be a gamble for a supervisor to work with you if you're an independent artist. Problem with the copyright or anything that doesn't quite fit, like you didn't get a co-writer to sign off on the license agreement, then they're putting their reputation,
it's
their credibility on the line. So
for them to go to a trusted source.
And then some of them, if let's say it's an in-house, supervisor, like working in CBS and they're working on all the CBS shows, they're not allowed contractually. They're not allowed to work with an independent artist. They have to go through a vetted licensing. And it's just, we have to think about the client and what it's, what their world is like and what their factors are too. Sure. Another thing that came up, was that 67% of them said that the number of their music suppliers is growing at a rapid pace. Only 5% said that the number of music suppliers was shrinking. So what that tells me is that, there's a whole lot more competition. And like I said, I think there's a lot more potential. At the same time, even though there's more competition, I think there's going to be a lot more opportunity going forward. This is good news for us as artists. 53% of these music supervisors said that discovering new artists is really important, and then 47% of them, said that it's somewhat important. No one said that it's not important at all. So there's a lot of pride in discovering new artists, I think, as a music supervisor.
Hello. Hey, Jason.
Hey there.
Hey, you cut off for.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I lost you for a second.
Well, look, I know I got cut off there, but unfortunately, I'm going to have to go. We can do this a little bit later. I got kids coming in.
No, that's cool.
That I'm going to have to work with right now.
I think I have a. Can you hear me? Yeah, I can. Yeah, no, I think we're good, man. I'll edit everything together in a way that makes sense. I'll just cut out the last little part. Not a problem. Can you send me a track, though, that you want to feature? I'll play one of your songs at the end. So if you can send me like an MP3 of something, just let me know what it's called, and I'll put it at the end of the podcast. Sure, I'll send you a track, if not, hopefully today, if not though tomorrow at the latest. Okay. And I'll send you something that's been placed, just so your listeners can kind of get a feel for the kind of production or whatnot. And then I'll just mention where it was placed, just so they can kind of see, okay, like this track got placed in this setting or whatnot. Yeah, that'd be great. Do you know the name? If that makes sense. Okay, cool. Do you know the name of the song? Well, I haven't decided yet. I'll kind of think about it and take a look. Okay, send it to me, and then at the end of the podcast, I'll edit it in and I'll let people know where it's been placed. All right, sounds like a plan. Jason, thanks so
thanks.
much, man. Sorry about the bad connection.
Yeah, thank you. And no, it's all good. And if your listeners can hear this, just keep fighting the fight. I think if you make solid music that's well produced and hang in there, you will get placements. But it's a long road. It's definitely a long haul.
Awesome, man. Thanks, Jason. I'll send this to you when it's done and posted.
All right, sounds good, man.
All right, take care.
I'll get back to you with the track.
Sounds great. Have a great day.
All right.
Okay, bye. So after Jason and I recorded our podcast, Jason sent me one of his tracks called So Bad. And this is a song that Jason recently had placed in an episode of the television show The Originals. Again, this track is called So Bad. To learn more about Jason and his music, go to Jason's website, which is jmmoore.com. jmmoore.com. To learn more about me and my website and how you can license your music in television shows and films, go to howtolicenseyourmusic.com.
You're so bad, but you do it to me oh so good.